Jubilation as Indian anti-corruption activist Anna Hazare ends his hunger strike. Well, is this the beginning of a corruption-free era in India? Then has Hazare's movement introduced a new element into the country's politics? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Sami Zaidan. Well, Anna Hazare has become something of an icon in India. On Sunday, he broke a 13-day hunger strike against corruption after reaching a compromise with the Indian government. But this came amid 2 weeks of massive protests led by Hazare. And it's this anti-corruption movement which has dealt something of a blow to the Congress party. Prerna Suri has more.
It took 13 days and the support of tens of thousands for this moment. But even after he reached a compromise with the government, Hazare isn't about to give up.
This is just the beginning, and that's why these two children have helped me break my hunger strike. But I haven't stopped my agitation. Just given it a break. As long as our demands are not met, the fight continues.
Sunday for many was a defining moment. For a nation beset by corruption, Indians say their voices were finally heard.
Unity stands. That is the only thing which we learned. And the constitution is by the people, for the people, and for the people. That is what I've learned.
And the last few days has seen Indians unite in ways rarely seen. Hazare's fight against corruption has become a symbol for the millions of people who are regularly forced to pay bribes to get anything done. As peaceful protests took place across the nation, the government was embarrassed. The last 13 days, people here say, has transformed this country's polity. No longer can politicians afford to ignore the voice of their people. And although it's still a long way ahead before India gets its first strong anti-corruption law, what Anna Hazare has managed to achieve is to bring popular dissent like this from the streets and into this country's parliament. It was this strong public sentiment along with Hazare's failing health which forced the parliament on Saturday to break the deadlock. But in villages like this one, it's too early to celebrate. And while this woman supports Anna Hazare, she says there's a lot in India that needs fixing.
I wish we could remove corruption, but they should also be aware that in the villages, alcohol is a big problem along with violence. For a woman, it's a very difficult life in the village, and they should also fight for this.
For now, people are celebrating a historic victory. But the real work of weeding out corruption has only just begun. Prerna Suri, Al Jazeera, New Delhi.
Well, let's bring our guests into the discussion now. In New Delhi, Professor Mridula Mukherjee, historian and director of the Nehru Memorial Museum. In London, Dr. Marie Lal, South Asia specialist at the University of London. And on the line from New Delhi, we have Sanjay Nirupam. He's a member of Parliament with the Congress Party. Good to have you all with us. If we could start with Professor Mukherjee. Do you think this is the start of a new corruption-free era in Indian politics?
How I wish that were true, but unfortunately, once the euphoria is over, we've got to get down to brass tacks. And I'm sorry, but even if all the demands had been accepted, it would still not be the beginning of a corruption-free era, because it takes more than a very strong legislation to curb corruption. Corruption is a structural problem. It's got to do with the structures of governance. It's got to do with the structure of delivery systems. And those are the more fundamental areas. Deterrence can only do that much. And as far as the movement is concerned, I think yesterday what was conceded, if you want to call it that, was essentially three principles which were not that significant, which in any case nobody had much trouble about, and much more contentious issues such as whether the Prime Minister would be brought within the ambit of this new bill are still going to be decided in the Standing Committee. My own understanding is that what was achieved could have been achieved by other means. I'm not sure the movement was really about what it said.
All right,
getting the Lokpal. I think.
Let's come to that in a minute if we can. But if I can take some of the good points which you made there, and let's go over to our guest from the Congress Party, Sanjay Nirupam. Has the government basically found a clever way of diffusing this without really conceding on some of those key issues which Professor Mukherjee was mentioning there?
See, first of all, I would like to tell you one thing. There is nothing wrong in public movement in a democratic setup. Particularly, corruption is a big issue. It has to be addressed. And the people came out of their houses. Earlier, it was basically an attitude of let go attitude. That everything is just going on. Nobody was reacting. So I'm very happy. I salute Anna Hazare. But the basic issue was we had to enact it through a procedure. What is the procedure? The parliament had to enact it. We basically told them that, okay, it is going to take some time. They were giving deadlines. The government and the democracy cannot run on the basis of deadlines. Now, you have to understand one thing.
Yeah, but if I could interrupt, Mr. Sanjay, Parliament has backed some of the demands, but it hasn't backed some of the other more important ones. Like, for example, that the Prime Minister can be under the supervision, like the role of supervision over judges.
The three demands were there, like citizen charters and the constitution of Lokayukt under the Lokpal Act, and one more thing was there about the lower bureaucracy. These issues are basically nitty-gritty of any bill drafting procedure, and that has to be looked into by standing committee, which is a part of the parliament. In parliament, what we did, we basically passed a resolution that all these issues, contentious issues, should be sent to the standing committee, which is a select committee in parliament, and that committee has to come back to the parliament with the final draft. So we have been telling this group that, look, it's no problem. We welcome your ideas, but you have to wait. You have to wait for some time for the enactment. They basically finally they realize that what we are saying is good and best of the day. We have a democracy in our country, the largest functional democracy. We have a great constitution which provides each and everything to live, how to grow, that is why India is growing. India is the fastest growing country.
All right, okay. All right, Sanjay, if I could jump in there. Let's bring in Dr. Marie Lal into this analysis now. As we heard there from Sanjay, this is going to the Standing Committee of the Parliament, but how far do you think the Standing Committee is going to take this?
Well, let's first take one step back. I'd like to say that I agree with Professor Mukherjee and say that this is a structural problem that we have in the country. I lived in India for almost 5 years, and everything has to be paid for, even things which should be free. You also pay your way out of trouble. So there is a structural problem. I'd like to say with regard to the procedures that people are tired with the procedures, and I can understand that as well, because whilst a democracy has these procedures, they take a long time, but they're also enacted by people who have been at the bottom of some of the biggest corruption scandals in the last year. So before we talk about the steering committee, because I don't think we can really guess how far they're going to go and if they're going to take the Prime Minister under the ambit of the Ombudsman or not. I think we need to remember that in the past year we've had 5 major corruption scandals, and people are wary that the people who have been involved in these corruption scandals are actually also were sitting in Parliament, are still sitting in Parliament.
All right, so hang on, are you saying this is all theatrics then at this point?
I'm not saying this is theatrics at all. I think with regard to the people, it's certainly not theatrics. I think the government is very uncomfortable because effectively it's this government which has been sitting for the last few years that has had a series of corruption scandals, starting with the issue of the votes, the buying of the votes, and the Commonwealth Games and the telecom scandal. People are tired. They're looking for an alternative way. But I do agree as well that simply putting one more bill up is not actually going to solve the problem. The structural problem runs down the entire society with ordinary people who are taking bribes and ordinary people who are paying bribes. It is a very complex problem.
Talking there of past scandals, well, Hazare's actions have sparked much debate about the ruling coalition government. Leading news organisations have been talking about this. Let's take one news magazine, India Today, which has said in the hour of its greatest need, the Congress top leaders have failed the party. And now Hazare's movement threatens the survival of a UPA on the brink of breakdown. goes on to say the seemingly perfect division of power between Sonia Gandhi, the politician, and Manmohan Singh, the policy wonk, has imploded, exposing a party riven by indecision and miscommunication. Let's bring in Sanjay Nirupam once again into the discussion. Do you agree with that analysis that your party really has suffered something of a credibility setback by this whole episode?
Yeah, to some extent it is right. There are issues, there are scandals which have come up in the last two years. There is no point of basically rejecting that thing. But the point is there are corruption. There is a corruption in our whole polity, whole society. It is not for the first time that in the last 2 years the corruption scandals related to corruption has come up. In every part of our society, in every part of our country, the corruption is there. Like it's polity or judiciary or the bureaucracy or the administration or media or even media. Everywhere the corruption is there, we have to address this issue. But now, how to address this issue? How to check it? One bill is not enough. One law is not enough. Our young leader, Rahul Gandhi, suggested in the parliament, let us make a Lokpal, which is going to be basically a watchdog type of thing, a constitutional institution. For that, we'll have to amend the constitution. But even that is not going to be enough. We have to create a sense of character in our society that, please, for God's sake, your prime object is to develop the country, not develop you. In our country, most of the people are busy in developing themselves.
Okay.
Politician or anybody else.
All right, let's bring in Professor Mukherjee then. If this is so much bigger than simply a bill in Parliament, how did the middle classes get so focused and mobilised by this one hunger strike?
Well, I think that, you see, what happens is that historically when a movement or a popular mobilization emerges, it is not necessary that people are only aroused on that particular issue. That issue becomes the focus and a means of expressing discontent on a variety of issues. There has been price rise of an inordinate kind over the last year and a half. There is a disgust because of the scams that have happened. There are all kinds of other issues related to the daily lives of people. Also, in my opinion, because of the economic reforms and the high growth rates that we witnessed in the last 20 years, middle class India and particularly the youth of India had developed a certain pride about the country. And in that sense of pride, these scams, corruption one after the other, and it's not only the Congress party. The latest, in fact, is the Chief Minister of Karnataka, who's a BJP man. The latest victim of corruption or anti-corruption, whatever you want to call it. So that has hurt the pride of Indians, that we don't want to be living in a country in which we cannot hold our head high in the countries of the world, and we are exposed as being a country of scams and a people who are always prone to corruption.
Okay.
I think this is how I analyze the sentiments of the people which have got expressed in this movement to the extent that it's a spontaneous movement.
Okay, if I could bring in at this point,
if
I could jump in, let's bring in Dr. Lal into the discussion then at this point. I mean, has this hunger strike movement then become the vehicle to express all those concerns and dissatisfactions that Professor Mukherjee is talking about because the government went ahead and arrested him, threw him in prison?
Well, I think the hunger strike in many ways reminds the population about the Gandhian movement, and that I wanted to add that to Professor Mukherjee's analysis. Because I agree with everything she said, and I think that has sort of sparked the imagination of the younger generation, which didn't go through pre-1947. But I think the government acted quite foolishly when they brought Anna Hazare, who has tremendous public clout and respect, and they took him to Tihar jail. And I think the government shot itself in the foot. I mean, I understand in a theoretical way that the government was saying we're not going to be held to ransom and we will go through our processes and we can't have protests like this derailing our processes. But then at the same time, a man like this, who has that kind of public respect, and there are not that many people who are willing to undertake a fast to death, and he was willing to go the entire way in order to prove his point. So in many ways, the government made a huge mistake by taking him to Tihar jail, arresting him, and actually made the whole issue much more complicated than it needed have been.
All right, your response, Mr. Sanjay, to that. Did the government shoot itself in the foot?
See, these are basically administrative decisions, and every time your decision cannot be correct. But it's a fact that we basically...
But what is your opinion, sir? I know it's an administrative decision, but do you think it was the right administrative decision?
No, what I have to say, that people at large are frustrated because of various reasons. It is not only corruption, it is illiteracy, it is poverty, it is price rise. It is security problem. So all these problems were basically converged on this during this movement, during this agitation, and the people came out of their houses. Nothing wrong in it, but it should not be at the cost of democratic values.
Okay, but I mean, my question though, sir, is it right to put him in jail with the same officials who have been accused, or others who have been accused of crimes and corruption? I mean, can the Congress Party claim still to be the party of the common man when it puts a hunger striker in a jail?
Goes without saying that putting him in jail was a wrong decision, because we are a Gandhian country. In our country, anybody has a right to protest, has a right to sit on hunger strike, and he should be allowed. And that is the basic principles we have been following for the last 60 years, and that is why our democracy is successful. That is why we are growing. That is why we are day by day we are increasing. Our society is increasing. Our society is prospering. This is the social fabric, the basic value of social fabric, and the culture of this country.
Dr. Lal wants to jump in. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the government keeps on changing its mind. I mean, on the 17th of August or 18th of August, I can't remember, Dr. Manmohan Singh said effectively that this kind of protest was undermining the government, was undermining the protests, the process, and that he didn't want to see protests like these. And now you see a 180-degree shift in that. The government doesn't seem to have a clear line, and it doesn't seem to have leadership either. In fact, this is something which has been upsetting the people for the last year and a half, where there's been one scam and one corruption scandal after the other. The Prime Minister just takes a long time before saying anything at all, before taking a stand. And there is a leadership issue which I would really like to hear more from the Congress Party about.
Right,
I mean, I'm not saying this is only Congress. Of course, there are issues with the BJP as well.
Dr. Lal, let's hear it right now. Sanjay, your response to that. Is there a crisis of leadership within your party?
It's a wonderful point. What Dr. Manmohan Singh said, that please don't undermine the parliamentary procedure. Please don't undermine the constitutional system. That is what he said. The whole hunger strike was against the parliament. The whole hunger strike was on the basis of a deadline. Within 10 days, within 15 days, you have to enact the law. So we were telling them, please don't insist on that issue. It is not possible. And that is what they realized finally. That if their demand was just to discuss this thing in the parliament, nothing wrong with it. And we discussed it, debated it.
Can I come in here, please?
Please, Professor Mukherjee.
Yes, I wanted to say that I think undoubtedly in the beginning, in the first few days, the government misjudged the situation. I think they did not anticipate the kind of popular support that actually happened. And therefore, the policy was one of actually trying to, just handle it administratively. But I do think that the movement also needs to look at what mistakes they made. I think that they did very well in the initial few days when they handled the arrest and cashed in on that very heavily. But I think soon when they started attacking members of politicians in general, they managed to unite the parliament against themselves. And I think there were many things that happened which need to be looked at very critically by the people in the movement itself, because you can't afford, as leaders of a movement, to unite the whole political class against yourself.
Okay. Okay, I think Sanjay wants to come in on this. And on that point of perhaps losing the support, as some are suggesting the Congress Party is doing, of the youth, of the middle classes, of the urban population, the very people who the Congress Party wanted to kind of count on or develop and nurture its support amongst. Is that a worrying development for you?
See, the Congress Party has been always in the favor of poor people, the middle class people. There's nothing wrong. It has been our consistent policy. One. Second point, what Professor Mukherjee was saying regarding the whole movement. The movement was basically trying to target the whole political system in India. You cannot deny the political system. Yes, that's true. There's something wrong in our political system. There's something wrong in the polity. There's something wrong in the whole electoral process in India. There's something wrong in the parliamentarians. But you cannot just deny and reject the whole establishment, the existence of the parliament, existence of the political system. The whole movement was to basically uproot the political system in India. That is not going to be accepted.
Okay. If we could go to Dr. Lal on that's an interesting point there.
I disagree.
In a sense,
I disagree. I disagree with this. I don't think the movement is trying to hijack the political system. I don't think if you ask the people who are behind Anna Hazare that they want to actually get rid of Parliament or any of the processes. But I think, as you in fact said yourself before, there is a right to protest, and people are fed up, and they have a right to be fed up when you have one corruption scandal after the other, and the people in Parliament are going to be kept out of the ambit of the Ombudsman and out of the bill. So there is obviously a problem here. They're not trying to get rid of Parliament. This is not a revolution.
Let's put the question this way, though. The fact that it took someone going on a hunger strike to make any progress in Parliament on this issue, in a sense, does that expose what we could say at least the deficiencies of the system, the deficiencies of democracy in India?
I think basically that there are problems in all democracies. It's not only in the Indian democracy. And the Indian democracy does have a tradition of peaceful protest, and hunger strike is one of them. And if you look at what happened in London a couple of weeks ago, where there was looting and rioting in the streets, that is another way of protesting.
That demonstrated some deficiencies there too. Indeed. Professor Mukherjee, you wanted...
Exactly, absolutely.
Professor Mukherjee, I think you had a different perspective on this.
Yes, I want to say that, I don't think that it's the hunger strike that has led to the Parliament responding and this bill coming about. I'd like to give you the example of what I think is a far more important piece of legislation which has had immediate impact. That's the Right to Information Act passed in 2005. It was based on a movement which was at least 10 to 15 years old, starting from the grassroots. Lot of popular protest, but not this kind of coercive protest, and actual grassroots level based protest from the rural areas coming up, involving the middle classes, and then fighting it out in the Select Committee. 153 amendments were made in the Select Committee of the Parliament. The activists who pioneered that movement, the NCPRI of Aruna Roy, Nikhil Dey, etc., they sustained the mass protest, and they sustained the intellectual mobilization, and they sustained the hard work in the Select Committee, and saw to it that the best possible legislation, in fact, it's an example for the whole world. It's the most radical legislation that the Indian Parliament has passed through a proper electoral process, political process based on mass protest combined with parliamentary work.
All right, let's take a final thought then from Dr. Marie Lal. If the middle classes have been mobilized now, and if the Congress Party has been somewhat undermined, does this equal a boost for the nationalists? And we've got elections coming, of course, as you know, just around the corner next year.
Well, I think elections in India are always decided much closer to the election date, and they're decided by macro issues, specifically if people are doing better economically. So I wouldn't necessarily think that this memory of this might decide the elections next year. If people are more comfortable economically, they will re-vote for Congress. The other thing is, what is the alternative? I think actually we're talking about a leadership crisis in Congress. There is a leadership crisis with the BJP. They haven't got a leadership in place either. So I think there are two issues here. If there's more corruption in the next year, just before the elections, that could effectively affect the elections. But I don't think that we can super guess now what is going to happen.
Time will tell then. Thanks so much. We've got to thank our guests here, Dr. Marie Lal, Professor Mukherjee and Mr. Sanjay Nurapam. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. As always, we welcome your comments and suggestions. You know where to send them. InsideStory@aljazeera.net. For now, it's goodbye.